loud. Okay, and with that, we will go ahead and get started with today's webinar, which is on emergency planning. We are fortunate today to have Heather Baer as our host. She is also the education chair for AVROA and has done a lot of work to get these webinars up and going and to begin to develop resources for all of our members to use. Many of you know Heather as the host of the popular Vacation Rental Success podcast, which now has a library of over 250 episodes. And if you haven't had a chance to listen to the podcast, I encourage you as you're driving to your beach house or your vacation rental property to listen to that podcast. Lots of good information and really will help you connect to the industry. She is the co-founder of the Vacation Rental Formula, which is an educational resource for owners and managers, and she's the CEO of one of Ontario's largest rental management company. She's been immersed in the industry since the mid-1990s, and you can find her online in many locations, and she's always happy to help. So a great resource for AVROA and a terrific board member. Thank you so much, Heather, and thank you for bringing us this important topic.
Oh, it's my pleasure, April. I'm going to start to share my screen now. And here we go. Right, just checking, April, that...
yes, it's up. It's up and working. It's up. And I'm going to go ahead and mute everyone's line.
Yeah, April, while you're... you can't see my... anything on the screen except the first slide, can you?
Correct. I can just see the emergency planning and disaster management open slide.
Okay. I'm probably going to toggle in and out of video, but for now, as I introduce this, you're going to be able to see my face. So welcome and thank you to April for that introduction. That's great. As I said, I've been in the industry for a long time. I was talking to another industry veteran this morning, and we were reminiscing about the mid-1990s and classified ads in newspapers and signs on the lawns. So yeah, we go back quite a long way. So today I'm going to be talking about emergency planning and disaster management, which is pretty topical given the hurricanes recently. And in particular, this past weekend, we had 6 tornadoes touch down in our own province in Ontario. A lot of damage done with those tornadoes. And then this past summer, we've dealt with and this is just in our province, we've dealt with wildfires, we've dealt with floods. So certainly situations that require some form of disaster management. But emergency planning goes way beyond the large situations, the big events. And we're going to be talking about some of the very smaller and what could be considered minor events as we go through this session. So I'd ask you to stay to the end of this session. We've got a free emergency planning pack that you're going to be able to download if you wish at the end of this session. So stick with me, or if you are coming back to this at a later time, and seeing it on the AVROA website, if you're a member, you have access to it, to come back to it at a later time, then of course you'll still be able to collect this information. So I'm just doing a quick check with April just to make sure that that these slides are moving through. Okay, wonderful. So why you plan for disaster? Well, if you're in a hurricane area or an area that is commonly affected by some of these larger disasters and emergencies, then you'll probably have some sort of disaster plan in place, some sort of emergency plan. But we think it's important to make sure that you plan for any situation that might occur. I mean, I'm just going to touch on a couple of the larger ones that have occurred within our company over the past 12 to 18 months. Ice storm. We often have ice storms through the winter. In some areas of Canada, I believe they have them through the summer as well. But we are just sticking through. We have our ice storms in the winter, so we make plans for what's going to happen in case of an ice storm, so that when it occurs, we know what to do. Every person within our company knows what to do. And this is important. This whole issue of emergency planning is important, whether you are an independent owner and just have one property, or whether you have multiple properties of your own, or whether you're a property manager and deal with hundreds of properties. It's just as important to have emergency planning in place. So it could be an ice storm. Did you think I was going to go here? Bed bugs. Bed bugs are an issue. I mean, having said that, in the 15 years that we've run our company, we've only had one issue of bed bugs. But that was enough to ensure that we now have an emergency plan in case we ever get the call again that says, we're here on vacation and I think we've got bed bugs in this place. So now when that happens, we have a very clear process to go through, and everybody is clear on what their role is within that process. This is something we're going to be talking about. Something else that's happened just recently, this was a scenario. Family, two families, in fact, with two cars, came back to their property after a shopping trip. They parked the cars in the car park, and it was very, very windy. And just as they'd unloaded their shopping from the trunk and they were walking into the house, there was a downburst of wind, and a tree came down right on top of one of the cars. It potentially could have been a lot more disastrous than it was. All this one involved was a write-off of one vehicle and a pretty disappointing end to a vacation. But we had a plan in place. We knew exactly what we had to do, who to call, who to contact, and how to deal with the guests. And of course, don't forget the zombies. We keep being told there's going to be a zombie apocalypse one day, so we planned for this stuff. We planned for everything. So in this session, we're going to talk about what we call the preparation pyramid, which is 3 separate areas where we do our preparation. So we have our own self-preparation. This is what we do with ourselves. If you're an independent owner, this is what you're going to do with yourself. Maybe involve your family and or your caretakers and any other stakeholders. You know, it could be plumbers and electricians and pest controllers, people that you would involve in preparing yourself for an emergency that might happen in your property. Then there's property preparation, and this can be a completely independent discussion, in fact, on making your property safe and ready for anything that might occur. And then finally, it's preparing your guests as well. And we're going to talk through that and ensure that you don't frighten your guests to death in terms of what might happen, because there's an awful lot that might happen. So let's start with self-preparation. And we do this in our company by taking a day, and usually in October and November, our day is coming up shortly, and we get everybody together, all our staff, and we sit around a table and we have a day of fun. We have donuts and we have coffee, and then we have lunch. And then, of course, I'm British, so we have tea and cakes in the afternoon. And that keeps us well fueled for what happens during that day. Now, if you're an independent, if you're an owner, you could involve your family and have a brainstorming evening. Bring in your caretaker, bring in anybody else that's involved. And then you sit down and you brainstorm all the possible things that could go wrong. And yeah, this is negative. This is you're thinking about the bad stuff. So everybody gets the opportunity to come up with ideas of things that could go wrong. And it could be, something that we've had recently in properties is mouse invasions. So somebody might mention, okay, mice, rodents, what about rats? What about a raccoon gets in the house? What about, and it tends to move on from there. So we, in our last brainstorming, we talked about what happens if a dog goes outside, frightens a skunk under the deck, and then the dog comes back into the house and jumps all over the furniture. And this happened to us 2 years ago. And we had a call from a guest to say, I'm so sorry, but my dog just went out, got sprayed by a skunk, and then he came back in the house and he's been all over the furniture and the place stinks and we don't know what to do. And we are leaving in 3 hours' time. And then for us, it was the next guests are going in 7 hours' time. So fortunately, we had a plan. We knew exactly what we were going to do. So we had started, we had done our brainstorming session, and we had planned for this eventuality. So when you're doing a brainstorming, when you've got all these possible scenarios, and it could be anything, environmental, so a tree falls down on a guest car, a guest slips and falls on a rock, and that's a liability issue, of course. The air conditioning breaks down in a heat wave. I mentioned pandemic here because these things have happened. And if you think back to the SARS virus in Toronto back in the early 2000s, and this panic, the media just got everybody so panicked. We had people in properties who didn't want to come back to the city, but we had the owners of those properties who wanted to leave the city and go up and take over their property because they wanted to get away from it. So, we always think about pandemics when we're doing our emergency planning. And then, of course, there's administrative issues. We can always say, whoa, no, we never double book. This isn't going to happen to us. But these things can happen. And we have a story of, and I'll come to that in a minute. So yeah, just look at those different, so once you've got all your brainstormed situations, just put them into different categories because it makes them a little bit easier to manage. So yes, we had a situation, not of a guest arriving a day early, but this summer we had a set of guests who arrived a week early. And they arrived, not only did they arrive a week early, but they arrived about 2 hours before the check-in time. And the property was empty. The caretakers had been and gone. This was a property where the key was under a rock. We still do that. We still have keys under rocks. So they let themselves in and they made themselves at home. And they started to cook, and all the rest of the family were out in the water when the genuine guests arrived at 4 o'clock. So at 4 o'clock, we get the panicked call from the guests who were meant to be there to say, we've just arrived at this cottage and there's people already there, and they say it's their week. So we had to deal with that situation. One of the reasons we do this exercise every year is that there's always something new, and this was new for us. We had brainstormed before about guests arriving a day early, and we had a plan in place that would have them accommodated in nearby hotels and motels overnight, and we deal with it that way. But a week early, that was a real new one. So that now goes on to our planning for next year. So next year, if a guest arrives a week early, we know exactly what to do. And what we did was we gently told them that they were there in the wrong week, and they should have arrived the following week. And once we got them to believe us, because they were firmly convinced they'd got the days right, but we had all the documentation to show them what week they actually had booked. And we were able to accommodate them in another property, fortunately. And then we had cleaners go in and clean up the property so that the guests who had arrived at the appointed time on their date were able to move in. And then we sent them, we sent the guests that a gift basket as well. So now we have this process in place in our plans. So when I say plans, we have a contingency plan for every situation. So each one has, it's written down, and it says, if this happens, if it happens that guests arrived a week early, then what we do is we talk to these guests, we talk to those guests, we look to see if there's an alternative, we create a set of alternatives for the guests that arrived early, we deliver that to them, we get the caretakers in to do the cleaning. And all of this has the goal of satisfaction under the circumstances, because in many of these cases, it's not going to be win-win. It's not going to be a win-win situation. People are going to be unhappy, but we want to get them satisfied under the circumstances. So every situation has a standard operating procedure. That's a contingency plan. And it's a written document in a folder that details the key people that are involved. So in that case, we had a caretaker, a cleaner involved that was able to go back and re-clean the property to make it good for the proper guests. The standard operating procedure will cover things like health and safety issues. So let's say a situation is somebody has called to say there is a problem with a safety issue. Then in our standard operating procedure, we have the health and safety procedures outlined very, very clearly as to what we have to do. So we also have in there a section for equipment and supplies. What do we need? What do we need in place to deal with the situation? And then finally, it's troubleshooting. And that's just a list of the things that we would start with the guests or with anybody who's involved to ascertain what the issue is and if there's anything we can do over the phone to deal with it. One of the situations that's going to come up in our brainstorming this year that we haven't come across before is people running out of toilet paper when they are an hour or no, well, they were 45 minutes away from the nearest general store. So yes, we deal with the tiniest little issue. So this is self-preparation. This is managing yourselves, your company, if you are a property manager, or independently, individually, if you're an owner, so that everybody knows what to do in a certain situation. And our folder of standard operating procedures is thick and it's indexed. It's indexed within those categories that I mentioned before. So when a call comes in and somebody said, let me give you, I mentioned mice. We've had a lot of mice this year. It was a lot to do with very, very hot weather, drought conditions, and mice just wanting to come indoors and get a drink of water. So we found quite a lot of mice in toilets, and which is always tough. You know, you arrive at a property and you go into the washroom and you lift up the lid and there's a mouse floating in it, and it's that can happen in the time it takes from the caretaker or cleaner to leave and the guest to arrive. You know, this is cottage country Ontario. We live with this stuff. So, you know, we have plans in place to deal with these things. You know, who is going to deal with a mouse invasion? Who's going to lay the traps? Who's going to pick up the traps after they've been set off? And who's doing the body removal? And everything is laid out in those SOPs. So that's our self-preparation. So second in the preparation pyramid is property. So we want to make sure that the property is as ready as possible to deal with any situation or any emergency that should arrive. So we do regular audits on a number of issues that could cause a problem. because, you know, this is about preparation. If you do all this stuff in advance, the less likelihood of the issues to actually happen. So we encourage all our owners in our company to do a bed bug check every month, and not just to check for bed bugs, but to document it. And they have a sheet that says what date that inspection was done. They have photographs, date stamp photographs that show edges of the mattresses, that show there is no evidence of bed bugs, and a number of other things that are included within that audit. So if there is ever any claim against an owner or our company about lack of inspection for bed bugs, we can come back to the documentation and say, look, this inspection was done on this date. Here's the date stamp photographs, and this is as clear as it can be that we have done our due diligence on this this issue. Same with hot tubs. For anybody who has a hot tub, then it's really, really important to have documentation there that says when the hot tub was last, when the water was last changed, what the chemical balance was on the last check. So any of our owners who have hot tubs should have a document that is dated every single time there is a changeover, to show that the chemical, if they don't change the water on every changeover, it will show what the chemical balance was on that changeover. And all that documentation is kept either in the property, locked up. You really don't want your guests to really pick up and see that you've done a bed bug check, because although it's nice to know, you don't want to be bringing that up with them. You don't want to be scaring them. So keep those documents somewhere in a folder, your regular audit checklists. And so it covers safety as well. So doing safety checks, of course, the usual one to consider is smoke alarms, changing out the batteries in smoke alarms. Document it, have it noted that when you changed the batteries, and that when other aspects of safety around the property were checked. This is helpful in many situations, but specifically if you ever get sued. If you ever get sued on a liability issue, let's say somebody has hot tub folliculitis, which is a thing, and we've had over the years a number of guests contacting us to say that they were in a property, and after they left, they went to their doctor because everybody broke out into a rash, and it was due to the hot tub not being hygienic. And where an owner was able to provide the documentation to say that this hot tub was checked, it was deemed to be hygienic and chemically balanced minutes, hours before they walked into the property. It has saved those owners a lot in the way of liability claims. You do regular audits on appliance operations, and that could be just a checklist that your caretaker has. Just checking that the lights, the exterior light bulb is working. And then property exterior. This really comes from a safety and liability issue, to make sure that the property is around the property is checked on a regular basis. And this could be, you've had some work done outside, and I've noticed this in a property just recently, because I always do an audit on an exterior of a property if I do an inspection. And the owner had a patio table with a glass top that had broken, and they'd had to exchange it just during a changeover. And their maintenance man had taken the old table and just pushed it underneath the deck, and he'd piled up the glass in there as well. Now that is, it could be a dog that gets under there and cuts itself, but it could equally as well be a curious child who goes underneath and then gets cut by glass, and then lo and behold, you have a lawsuit on your hands. So just regular audits on all these things are going to be really helpful in your property preparation. So in order to do this, you just prepare some checklists. So for your caretaker or cleaner, they have a checklist to do on every changeover. And as I mentioned, it could be that that checklist includes making sure that light bulbs are working and that appliances are working correctly. And just switching things on and switching them off and just making sure that every appliance, every feature is in working order is really going to save you a lot of time. And if a situation arises and those things haven't been checked. Then, of course, there's monthly checklists, as I mentioned, monthly for bed bugs, for sure. And that all that means is going around and checking mattresses and checking in those specific areas where bed bugs can be seen. I did a podcast episode a while back where I talked to a bed bug expert. And yes, there is one of those, and I bet he's great at dinner parties. You know, what do you do? I'm a bed bug expert. I'm sure that that conversation goes down really, really well. Biannual checks, you know, those where you check the smoke alarms, make sure the batteries, but even things like batteries in door locks, batteries in remote controls. You know, that might be something that you just need to do biannually. And then there's general annual checks on the overall property well-being. And doing this, although it's time consuming, but you only have to do it once. You only have to prepare the checklist. What I mean is time consuming preparing the checklist. You only have to do it once, because once you've got them in place, you know, it's just a piece of paper, or there's plenty of apps now that can help you with these checklists. So let's talk just briefly about safety audit examples. We are going to have Justin Ford come along and talk to us in an upcoming webinar more about vacation rental safety, because he is a vacation rental safety expert. So that webinar is going to be upcoming over the next couple of months. So I'm just going to cover off, you know, some fairly basic things like fire extinguishers, smoke alarms, as I mentioned, the dryer outlet, making sure that on your checklist for changeovers is a check on the dryer, what do you call it, the filter, and clear that out. But not only that, but the outlet itself, you know, once again, I've run out of words, that, you know, it looks like a big foil round thing. Just see how technical I am. But that can get jammed up with lint. So you know, make sure you check that as well as just the filter. And then sockets and wiring, you know, really important that you check those on a regular basis. Mice and rats will chew through wiring. And while it's probably unthinkable that you would have a rat in a property, you know, these things come in from outside, and they come in for water, they come in for nutrition. And if they're not getting it outside, they're going to find the nearest property to come into. So, you know, check the wiring, make sure it hasn't been chewed through, and all these things are going to give you confidence and lessen the possibility of an emergency occurring and your emergency plan having to go into operation. So then we go, oh, one other thing. See, I forgot that slide. Just this last weekend, we had a massive, as I mentioned, we had a massive storm here in Ontario, and we had a number of tornadoes touch down. But aside from that, the power went out I think we had about 30 families in different properties without power. And we encourage our owners to always have what we call the emergency power outage kit. And usually it's a tote and in that tote you'll find a first aid kit. Have I got one? Yeah. You'll find a first aid kit, spare batteries and flashlights, toilet paper, I put this is very low. This is very location dependent, because this is one that we would use. We have, so we have a skunk kit in our emergency supplies boxes because of that situation that I mentioned. That, you know, we have had dogs who've been sprayed by skunks. So if our owners have the proprietary skunk kit, which is hydrogen peroxide, Dawn washing up liquid, and baking soda, and a little instruction booklet on how to prepare the paste, which is then put over a pet, that takes the odor off a pet. So we have that skunk kit in our emergency supplies kit, but you might not have that. You probably wouldn't have that in somewhere where you don't get skunks. So one thing that we've introduced into our into our power outage kit recently is backup power for cell phones. And we just include a backup battery for a cell phone, just make sure that that is powered up. Because we had a number of situations this past weekend where guests couldn't call us, couldn't tell anybody their power was out because their cell phone had run out of battery. And you know, it always happens if you've got a power outage, you don't have battery in your phone at that particular time. It's, you know, that's what we call sod's law. We include jump leads as well, because a lot of our properties are very remote. So we need to include the help for people should they not be able to get their car started. And normally there's 1 or 2 vehicles at a property with several people being there. So the emergency supplies kit, or the power outage box, is sealed. It's in a sealed container. Now, how you seal it, it's entirely up to you. I mean, just duct tape wrapped around it would do. And we do say in our welcome book that this kit should only be accessed in case of an emergency or in case of a power outage. And if it is accessed at any other time, let's say they run out of toilet paper and they know there's some in that box, then they are charged for that. It just stops people going in and helping themselves to things that they don't need because they're not in an emergency situation. So that was self-preparation, property preparation, and now thirdly, we come on to guest preparation. And the first thing we don't want to do is scare the bejesus out of our guests. We don't want to worry them about bed bugs and about the possibility of mice or skunks or bears. We have bears too. Have I? Probably, you know, for anyone listening to this, you've probably all decided now you're never going to come to Ontario on vacation. You know, we have bears and raccoons and skunks and mice and mosquitoes and black fly and horsefly, and really it's lovely. But we don't want to frighten our guests without and, you know, needlessly. We just want to be upfront with some things that may help them in their planning. So we make sure that the information we send helps them to plan their vacation and to be aware in case a situation arises. So we have a lot of people going up to our cottage country in the winter. And it's not like, you know, going to a ski resort where it's all plowed and, you know, apart from hard packed snow on the ground, it could be and the cold, it could be any other season. For some of our guests going out to the country in winter, it's, you know, it's a little bit like a survival exercise. We suggest that they take a pack, including a blanket and some supplies in the vehicle with them in case they break down. Now, if you're in a hurricane area, you probably would tell them in a pre-arrival that, tell them what's going to happen in case of a hurricane. What would happen in case of mandatory evacuation? I mean, if you live there, you've probably been through this. You understand where the mandatory evacuation routes are. But for people coming in maybe from overseas, maybe, you know, it's important that you let them know that should something occur, and there is a mandatory evacuation, what they have to do. You also want to tell them what you do under these circumstances. Do you give them a refund? Do you give them any form of rebate? Don't leave it until they get home after they've had to cut their vacation short, whether it's voluntary or mandatory. Don't leave it until then to let them know whether they're going to get a refund or a rebate. I mean, we do it with our guests with power outages, because we have a lot of them. And we are very clear on what happens in case of a power outage, because it is beyond our control. However, if they are forced out of a property because of a power outage, and most of our properties have electrical water pumps, so you cannot flush a toilet, there will be no running water. And in winter, of course, there won't be any heat unless there's a wood stove. So the property becomes uninhabitable. So they would have to leave. And under those circumstances, we do refund the portion of the vacation that they have lost after the first 12 hours, because most people can, we'll wait 12 hours to see if the power is going to come back on. And mostly people can survive 12 hours without being able to flush a toilet. After the 12 hours, then we move to a slightly different scenario, and we let them know what happens in case of the power still being out, if they wish to stay or if they wish to leave. But we leave them in little doubt. They don't get home going, oh, am I going to get a refund, or will I get any money back? Can I have another can I replace this vacation with another weekend? The pre-arrival documents also mention mosquitoes and other things that go bump and bang in the night. Again, in your welcome book, you'd probably mention some of these things. So, in the event of, this is what you have to do. In the power outage kit, we have a laminated sheet that says, in the event of a power outage, this is, you need to call this number just to make sure the power outage has been reported, and other things that they need to know. We want to make sure that they switch off they make sure that the stove has been switched off. So in case they go to bed and they've left a pan on a stove, if the power outage happened at dinner time, we want to make sure that they don't wake up in the middle of the night to oil in a pan burning. Blog posts are great if there's something that could occur that you want to bring your guests' attention to, a sort of in the event of document. This was done. Do you remember the Zika virus? The media made a huge amount of the Zika virus, Linda Liu in Curacao wrote a blog post on her website that just laid it all out there. This is the Zika virus and your vacation in Curacao. This is what's going to happen, or this is what the media is saying, and this is what we are seeing it now, how we see it here on the ground. And the blog post went on to tell them about how they could prepare for coming to the Caribbean. So you can use, if you have your own website and you write blog posts, then every so often write a blog post. I mean, we have one on our site about preparing for winter rentals and what can happen, and why it's important to gas up your car before you come off the highway onto a cottage road, because our properties could be 30 miles down cottage roads where there's no gas stations. And if there's a power outage, they could get back out onto the highway and still have another good distance to go before they find a gas station that's open. So we suggest, in this blog post that, along with, I think we have 10 points, 10 ways of preparing yourself for a winter vacation in our neighborhood. Another one could be, I think we wrote one once that was just sort of things that go bump in the night. And it mentioned squirrels in the roof. Squirrels can come in the roof space, and that you might hear that at night. You might hear a water pump going off in the middle of the night, which in some older properties, the water pump does its run and then usually ends with a bang. And so we mentioned that as well, because we don't want people calling us and asking, and as an emergency, and saying something's banging in the house at night. So all these things are preparing you for emergencies and disasters, so that should something happen, and it will, you are prepared for it. And I'll just give you one final example. There was a knock on our office door earlier in the summer, and I think I knew it. I opened the door, and this scruffy guy is standing on the doorstep. He's got an envelope in his hand, and he holds it out, and he says, and I knew it, you've been served. And this was, any property manager knows that a lawsuit will come at some point. And this was a result of a slip and fall accident that happened in a property over a year ago. And we thought it had been dealt with. However, at the time that we had this claim, the year previously, we had created a standard operating procedure for, should this happen again? Because our staff didn't know what to do when this claim came in. They knew that they shouldn't be saying anything to the guest, but they didn't know what they could say, what they couldn't say. So we'd already put this into action, this standard operating procedure. So when I got this envelope, the first thing I did, because it's in our SOP, was call our insurance company. Under these circumstances, you don't say anything to anybody except your insurance broker, and that's your first port of call. I mean, I know that, but some of our new staff wouldn't have known that. If they had accepted this, or if they got a call to say that somebody's had a slip and fall accident, they may have said something that could perhaps have been used against us within a claim. So we know now that number one on that SOP is to call our insurance broker. Number two is to collect all the appropriate documentation, guest agreements, owner-manager agreements, for sending in support of our defense of the claim. So that's just one other example of how a standard operating procedure works. So that's just about it. I hope I have, oh yes, go on. Are you prepared for the zombie apocalypse? Because you never know what is going to happen. And yeah, we don't actually have a standard operating procedure for the zombie apocalypse, but it may be something that we'll be including on the next brainstorming session we do. So thanks for attending this. You can get a free emergency planning kit. So on the vacation rental formula, we have a complete course on emergency planning where we go through this in a lot more detail. And as part of that, we have a package of the forms that we use when we're doing the brainstorming and when we're preparing the standard operating procedures. So you can go to vacationrentalformula.com using that link that is on this slide, and you can collect those forms. I'll talk to April. We'll get that link out to you as well. So if you haven't taken it down, because it's quite a lengthy link, we'll send that link to you. So, anybody got any questions? April, do you want to come back in here? Can we take questions?
I have a question, Pat Greeny. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Yeah, thank you very much. A lot of good points. One thing I wanted to ask is about insurance that will allow you to not necessarily have to refund people, but allow for their folks who are guests to have their own insurance for cancellation in case of problems, and what company you recommend. We had a discussion about that in the Facebook page that Heather started, the Say No page, but it seemed like there was a lot of dissatisfaction with most of the companies. I'd like your recommendation.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different companies out there. I mean, as a company, we were using Travel Guard, and we weren't, not enough of our guests were taking it up, so Travel Guard fired us and wouldn't let us sell it anymore. So what we do now is we just tell guests that they should get travel insurance. We don't make any recommendations as to companies. You know, it gives you're opening yourself up to some other liability if you are sending people to a company that maybe has an exclusion clause that you don't know about. Because the guests could then come back to you and say, well, you suggested we went to this company and they haven't refunded me because of this whatever exclusion clause it might be. So we simply say, you know, go shop for travel insurance, so that you have it in place in case of cancellation. There are some companies, and I'll be researching more when I go to VRMA next month. There's some companies out there that do offer travel insurance that is that you can sell as an owner. I can't actually remember the name of the company, Pat, but I will be, as I say, I'll be going to VRMA and talking to some of these people in October. And I'll share that information when I get back. But I know there was a lot of discussion on the Say No group about insurance after the hurricane, after the last hurricane, because of, you know, what do you do in case of mandatory evacuation? And there's always going to be two sides. There's always going to be the owners who will say, you know, I have so much empathy with guests, I will refund them under any circumstances. And others who will say, hey, this is a business and guests should have their own travel insurance, which would cover them in event of that sort of situation. However, every owner should be carrying their own insurance, which possibly has business interruption insurance. So lots of different things out there, and I'm not that qualified to talk about it, but I'll come back from VRMA with as much information as I can.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Any other questions?
Hi, Heather. Can you hear me, Heather?
Yeah, Luann.
This is Luann. My question was also about travel insurance for the guests. I'm in a hurricane area, and I think I would love for someone to address it, even just for us as owners to share which companies we've had good experiences with and bad, because I had someone who my area was not affected at all, but she said she couldn't get there. And, you know, it was a $7,000 rental that she wanted me to refund. And for most of us in hurricane areas, we have our business interruption kicks in at something very high. We'd have to have a true hurricane hit before we can collect on it. So I'd like to know how many people are actually, I was thinking about offering my guests the opportunity, you know, tell them about trip insurance and offer to share the cost with them, because it puts us in an awkward position if they don't pick it up and they're unhappy. We don't want them unhappy, but we don't want to absorb the losses either.
Yeah, I think it comes down to this guest preparation, that you, so that they know when they book what would happen in the event of some disaster, emergency happening. I mean, we had something similar here with wildfires, and people, you know, saying they wanted to cancel their vacation because they were scared that the wildfire would spread. And they were also scared about air quality, and they wanted money back. And in the event, you know, the fire didn't spread, there was no impact to air quality, but they'd cancelled, and we had to say no. There is, you know, we cannot refund you. This was your choice. So it's preparation, I think, so that before they go, they have a good idea of what would constitute a case for a refund or rebate.
If you are listed on HomeAway, even if someone rents directly through you, HomeAway does have a policy that guests can pick up, and it's really pretty reasonably priced. Now, it won't cover everything, but it will cover a lot of things. I just don't know how well people can actually collect on it once they've taken out the policy.
Yeah, I think from my experience with some of these insurance companies, they are pretty good at paying out where there isn't an exclusion clause. I mean, what we cannot account for is Airbnb and their extenuating circumstances, because they will come down immediately on the side of the guest and refund. So that's a tough one, because if you're with if it's an Airbnb booking and there is what they call an extenuating circumstance, you really have no argument against that.
This is Ani Switzer. I have to add also that we've had reports that TripAdvisor has started refunding people as well when the area is not even really impacted by the hurricane. So now you've got 2 out of the 3 OTAs making decisions for you.
Yeah, all the more reason to create your own website and book direct.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Other questions or things people would like to share?
Heather, I had a question about your monthly bed bug checkups. Is that something that wouldn't be really noticed with your regular turnovers? You have to have like an additional monthly check for that?
Yeah, I mean, unless your caretaker takes, everything off the bed, including, mattress covers, and we would always recommend fully enclosed mattress covers anyway. But even so, just a monthly check would involve unzipping those enclosures and just checking, whereas it may not be something that would necessarily be done in a changeover check. But there's precautions as well with bed bugs, not introducing old furniture to a property. But then in many circumstances, as our bed bug expert pointed out, it's the guests that bring in the bed bugs, and it's probably the guests 3 weeks previously that brought them in, maybe in a library book. I wasn't aware that bed bugs thrive in libraries.
Okay, other questions? I'd also like to ask if anyone has suggestions for topics that they are particularly interested in. We are trying to come up with a longer term schedule, so it would be helpful if you had, whether they're very specific things or they are more general. Does anyone have anything they'd like to mention? Got a number of people muted, so if you want to talk, you can just unmute yourself. Luann?
Well, one of my biggest problems is I only have 2 homes, is finding comparative pricing. I don't know if I'm just curious if anybody knows if there's anything out there, any systems for small people that could automate it and make it easy for me to do that, other than going through everyone on HomeAway or wherever and checking prices every month.
Well, I don't know if you can use something like Use Wheelhouse or Beyond Pricing, but I think a webinar on the whole issue of yield management and pricing would be quite, that would be quite helpful all round, because unless you're using Airbnb's suggested prices or HomeAway suggested prices, then you're really sort of out on your own on that one.
Yeah, I think that would actually be a really good topic, because I think we all struggle with that. And VRB, go ahead, Ani, do you have something?
Oh no, I was just agreeing.
Okay.
some of the other things that might be of interest to people is some of the things you've touched on in some of the other vacation rental seminars and stuff is services that we can use to do some of this work for us, virtual assistants, those types of things.
Oh, outsourcing. Yeah, I've got an podcast interview coming up with somebody's talk. We're going to have a whole episode on outsourcing. But yes, it would be good. I think we could do a full webinar on that. I think because outsourcing covers so much. You know, from outsourcing your cleaning to a cleaner. To outsourcing logo design to Fiverr or web design to Upwork or using a virtual assistant. So I mean, we in our property management company, we've had a virtual assistant employed in the Philippines for the past 5 years, and it's probably one of the best things we ever did. And you don't have to employ somebody full time. You can have them for 5 hours a week or 10 hours a week. So that, I think that, what do you reckon, April? I think that would be a good one to do as well.
Absolutely. And I'm taking notes on this, and we have a bucket of things that people have suggested in the past and that we've thought of. So I think, Luann, that's a really good suggestion, and we will look for that webinar in the next couple of months. I think we are planning for next month to do one on newsletter and customer relationship building. Do you want to talk about that a little bit, Heather?
Yes, I mean, I haven't absolutely confirmed this, but I wanted to bring in Jason Beaton, who actually he works with us in the vacation rental formula. He's our chief marketing officer, but he is an expert in digital marketing and automation, and that's automation of the emails that go out to your guests and in newsletter creation. And we've found in our company that since we started to do this, to automate this, it really has increased conversions, and people are out there sharing our newsletters, and it's been incredibly helpful. So hopefully we'll be able to confirm that over the next few days once I tie Jason down and tell him
get him into submission.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's great. I think we're right at 2 o'clock. And Heather, we really appreciate your time, your expertise, and always your good humor. So thank you so much for presenting today. And I will be sending out the link to the recording. It will be maintained forever in the AVROA in the AVROA member dashboard. And one other thing, we are trying to get people's phone numbers and trying to fill out the membership directory a little bit. So if you haven't logged into your member dashboard, it would be great if you could do that. You can put where your home property, where you live, and then where your properties are located. Because eventually, as we get to 300, 500 members, you'll want to be able to create meetups and do some things with some of your other members, especially if you maybe have a threat of regulation or something like that. So we're trying to collect more data, and the more that you can help us with that, the more we're going to be able to grow, and help each other grow. So with that, thank you all. We appreciate your time, and we look forward to the next webinar. Thank you, Heather.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.